In this section, we finally get to the map UI. I hope you followed the instructions before for configuring the map. If not, please follow through with that. If things don't work and if you don't see the map or it acts funny, check out with us in the online support forums. You can also check out the map section in the deep dive into mobile development course, which comes bundled. Before we begin, we need a class we discussed before in the maps module, the map layout. I didn't change much as left it as is. Since it's already available elsewhere, I won't go into the full discussion here and go right into the form itself. Before we proceed, I'd like to highlight some subtle things in this screenshot and discuss what we will and will not do. I won't do the side menu right now, but I will do it soon. The Where To field is really a button that leads to a different UI. This UI is overlaid on top of the map, so it is a part of this form. I'll position one taxi in a hard-coded location as part of the mockup. The icons at the bottom are historic rides. I'll add 2 hard-coded historic rides for now. I won't go into the notice at the bottom. It's possible, but it would be non-trivial. Let's jump right into the code. You need the JS key from Google Maps as explained in the map extension page. This must have a filled up value. We usually use border layout, which implicitly disables scrollability. Layered layout doesn't do that, and the form's content pane is scrollable on the Y-axis by default. Notice we didn't use a thread here, and instead used call serially on idle method. On the login form, I didn't use that because the animation might have prevented idle from occurring. This shadow is used later on in the show navigation toolbar method. The transition in the main application are based on cover, and the transition out will only be a problem. The map is on the lowest layer and everything is placed on top of it. The layer is on top of the map and uses the map layout. Here we will place the car and other landmarks we need. I place a car on top of the map in Tel Aviv. Notice that the car is just a label. I've set the opacity to 140 to match the translucent cars in the native app. Notice that the map layout takes a quad as constraint, so it can properly position the car. This is the small square we place next to the Where To button. I could have used a Unicode value too, but it wasn't available in all the fonts. Notice the Where To element is just a button as it moves us to a separate UI and isn't really a text field. The history buttons are floating action button instances that are customized in terms of styling. I used text area instead of span label because I wanted the history element to act as a single component with lead component. Lead components can take over a hierarchy of several components and handle the events for everyone. So in this case, click on the text area below the history will trigger an event in the floating action button. The bottom of the map has a gradient overlay that darkens the bottom. This is probably in place to make the history labels readable. I just generated a gradient image in Photoshop and placed it here. We do 2 important things here. We use the overlay toolbar, which floats on top of the UI. We initialize the side menu, which we will discuss soon. That was a lot to cover, but there is a lot more. We did mention 3 new styles above, which isn't that much all things considered. The Where To style has some subtle nuances such as dark grey text. The padding is large and obvious. I played with it a bit to get it right. The margin is special. We want some margin from the sides so it won't touch them. We need a lot of margin from the top to leave room for the title area. The corners are rounded on the native widget. This is very subtle, so I left it at 0.3 mm, which should be very easy. It also has a shadow, which is more obvious, and 80 opacity. The font isn't big, just slightly bigger than normal, but the typical light font. The history button is the round button on the bottom of the map leading to historic rides. It's black on white but is implemented as a floating action button. So it derives from that and uses the border settings from the floating action button. The history label is the dark text element below, which is technically a text area, but acts as a label. The text color for this is black, while the padding is 2 mm on all sides except for the top where we want to be as close as possible to the floating action button, which is already well padded. Margin is 0 as usual. And the font is a relatively small 2.2 mm, so we can fit multiple rides in one form.